at the moment, because we're all under lockdown, we have a great opportunity, which is that we're actually going to see more nature than we ever see usually because we're too busy. One thing you can do, which is very exciting and very interesting, and it'll help you kind of remember this extraordinary moment in history, is you can keep a journal. Now there's different kinds of journals, but the best thing to do is to actually get something that's going to stand the test of time and something that's easy to carry and rugged. I've been keeping journals for a long time. I buy a really good journal, or often I've had them gifted to me. The ones that are used by art companies, this is a Winsor Newton. I'm not sure if they make this one anymore, but this is an extremely rugged sketch pad. It has stitched binding, a leatherette kind of, or leather cover. These ones can be a little bit expensive. Always make sure that once it's a good bound cover and the pages don't come out and are good paper, that these are handy to have, just to keep, you know, a little ribbon to keep the page. But also some of them have one of these things, which is a little kind of pocket in the back, and you can keep all sorts of things. This one's from a few years ago. I have an old student travel card in it. I write, and at the same time I leave spaces to put photographs into later on, but the photographs don't have to be like fancy printed photographs. My way of doing it is to buy an A4 label, and I'd buy maybe a packet of A4 labels, or you can buy them individually if you want, and then I judge how big the photo should be on the page, and I basically just copy and paste onto just an ordinary, say, a Word document page, but I'd have spaces left for loads of the journals, so I might do a whole journal. I wouldn't put the photos in, I just leave spaces for the photos and then put them in later. This is a journal I had in Malta, and I stuck the photos in. They're literally just labels, and they're stuck in like that, and you can see in this case a white spotted chafer. I was there to examine the water in Malta. Malta is the most densely populated country in the world, consists of 3 islands, and they have no natural rivers or lakes, no permanent rivers or lakes, so water is very difficult. That's an Egyptian grasshopper, which is a huge grasshopper as large as a bird, and there's the entrance into Maltese government buildings. So it was a very exciting trip, but this is an extremely rugged journal I took, and here is the pocket. And these journals, they're really handy. But you don't need to just use one of those journals. Now, this here would be your typical notebook. This is a cheap art sketchbook. It has the ribbon that you want. Creamy, strong pages. The binding in this is stitched, but it might not be the best. I think it's more glued and stitched. This would be the cheaper example. There's this little elastic thing on the back, so that when you want to close the book, you can just keep it in your pocket, put it around like that. So this is the typical notebook, and in the back you can see there's a pocket, and there's a ribbon here, and binding. The really good ones, you can actually see the stitching. Some are better than others. Ones made by Winsor Newton, Dale Rowney, any of those are really good because they're made to stand the test of time. But there's a few others as well that are any good reputable art company. But Moleskin are another example. They tend to make smaller journals than this, mostly the famous Moleskins, really designed to stand the test of time. I tend to go for unlined pages because I like to be able to draw and paint as well sometimes into the book if I need to. Journal can be any size you want. Obviously it's not a big thing, you're just keeping a record and it's only for yourself. So the fact is, if you're taking it very seriously, you might want something very good. This is an old, very old bound book I used as a journal. It was basically basically, it was just, it has no ribbon to keep pages or anything, no notebook. It was just, it had been bound with the idea of printing. I think they were going to print an encyclopedia on it, but a bookbinders threw it out. But it has some important things from my life in it and records. So here's a little adventure I had. This is from back in the 1990s, and I was really just starting to get into journals. And that's me in the paper back in the 1990s, and my first experiences of false widow, spiders and things like that. And I have a few illustrations. I worked hard on my illustrations of moths and things like that, and fossils. I was into a bit of everything at the time. And crab spiders, of course, which like to walk on the flowers. And the various finches. The green finch is very rare now in gardens because of a terrible disease that broke out about a decade ago, but this was a decade before that. Goldfinch, and of course the chaffinch, which you don't see in gardens quite as much as you used to. I used to press flowers as well. Now you can see this is a really big book, the pages are incredibly good, but I used to press flowers. For the first few years they were lovely. There's the cowslip and of course the false oxlip. The first few years they were lovely, but unfortunately they began to fade. Now look at the date there, you can see. So I gave up pressing flowers, and instead I went for either drawings or for, there's like a fox I had an encounter with who was carrying a rabbit. So I did drawings, but later on when digital cameras came around, it became cheap to print. I actually started to use those and do the method I was showing you there, which is to print photos of any size you want onto sticky labels and then paste them in. Just literally just put them into the notebook, and that's from 1996. It is incredible. Like, I mean, I even have a few references here to the Atlanta Olympics and things like that in it. On the other hand, what actually happens is if you don't use a good notebook, this is one of my first notebooks, and it's from, let's see if I can, from early 90s. And it was just a spiral bound notebook, the typical thing you find anywhere in the supermarket today. But this is my note on a creature called the hornet moth. There you go, first seen on Monday 9th of June, and I contacted a famous naturalist at the time, and because there were only there were no digital cameras, it was expensive to get film developed, and I had only a terrible camera. And I took the best picture I could and sent it to him, but it was terrible. But 20 years later, or nearly 20 years later, I found the same creature again. It was more than 20 years actually, I think. I photographed the same creature again when it appeared, because they only appear after a number of years of living in timber. And it's a moth that looks like a wasp. And it's bigger than a wasp even. So it's called the Hornet Clearwing. And I was able to photograph it and send it to the naturalist in question, and he was really delighted because he'd actually remembered the original conversation we'd had. But unfortunately, look what happens when you use shoddy material. So this is what happens when you use shoddy material, and it wasn't my fault. I was only a kid and I didn't know. The paper isn't too bad, but look at all the other pages have fallen out. I am literally left with only one page of my notebook from 1990 or 1989, 1990, which is terrible. I do have an older one from the 1980s, slightly older, but that's really terrible. For a while I used ordinary O'Brien diaries and things like that. They're not too bad, but the O'Brien diaries are good actually, but they're lined, and you know, it's a diary. The thing about a journal is you don't have to keep it every day. You can actually leave gaps of years or months between keeping your journal. Now what I normally do is I sort of buy really decent ones these days to use, ones that will stand the test of time. These ones are made in Canada. It's the same old thing, extremely good binding, really well stitched, has the ribbon, has the notebook in the back, or the little pocket book, little pocket in the back. Now I tend to carry small ones in summer because I wear less clothes in summer, because you know, you just wear your pants and you might carry it in you might have a light jacket on with just a pocket big enough to hold something that big, or even smaller. But in winter I'd use these bigger ones, and it's the exact same as that. This one is a magnetic fastening. It's not magnetic fastening, it's not as good, but it's okay, it does the job. I kind of prefer these elastic ones, but the elastic does snap sometimes, and there are other ones. This one here, this real tough one, had 2 buttons and a rope that went around them, and you could just you shut it like that and you bound the little rope around this one holding it shut. But the buttons fell off. That's what happens when if you have any sort of an action-packed adventure, especially when you're out and about, because you see, you might have it in your pocket and you're lying down in the mud, maybe taking a photo, or out and walking through a forest, or you're drenched. That's why you need good ink, because you could get a drenching. I have in the past opened up a notebook and found all the ink run off and I've lost pages. So I tried to buy a good pen, and I have to be honest, this is a Staedtler pen. It's very good. The ink doesn't run. It lasts for years and years, and so do the big pens, and can't really complain about any of them. They're very good. So that's basically that. That's just a little idea of what to do, of how to keep a notebook. But remember, a notebook is kind of like a time machine. I mean, I open up one of these, like this one that and like here's a photo of me much younger. And here's things I'd forgotten about, just receipts and a map, a hotel, thank you, whatever, you know. A different world, in fact, and I've photographs of bus timetables for buses that don't exist and things like that, or just little, you know, anything. So it allows you, after a few years, to go back in time. You can literally, you open up your journal and you've got your own personal archive. There's a world there that you've forgotten, and it's incredible what you forget. When you start to keep a journal, you will realize what you forget. Now, for a wildlife journal, basically you can keep it, it can be light or it can be heavy. You can put in a lot of information, just a little. Do it for yourself. It's good to keep it. It's good fun. It gives you a bit of a mission in life, particularly in times like this when we have an unusual situation. So if you have any kind of a journal, it can be even one of these little crappy ones. If you store it better than I did, it won't just be one page floating around on the end of some wires. But any journal will do for the time being. A copybook even, and just write down what you see every day, the nature you see every day, the little things, the little bug you see on your wall in your house, or anything at all, the flowers you find. It's actually very therapeutic just to keep one. And you don't have to keep it every day. Just put things that are important to you into it. And it doesn't have to be a wildlife journal. Obviously, I'm taking it from the angle of wildlife and nature, but it can be absolutely anything you want yourself. But that's just a suggestion. And as you can see, I have a pretty impressive record now, going back a few years. It's kind of like a one-step program. Each day is one step, but if you keep it over a number of days, those days amount to weeks, and then months, and then years, and it's incredible what you have. And right now, as I finish up, I'm being watched by a pigeon.